How
Oh,
are you
I
doing?
do. Thank you for having me. It's so lovely to be with everybody today and happy almost love day. So, I'm Dr. Diane, as Dr. Willow and Leah said. And just to introduce myself and the topic, we're talking today about rebuilding trust, rebuilding communication. We're talking today about safety and all of this in relationship to intimacy. So, my background is as a naturopathic doctor, but also as a doctor of acupuncture and oriental medicine. So, what we're going to do today is largely what my passion is, which is combining kind of the science with the sexiness, with the spirituality, and with both kind of like the Western part of the philosophy as well as the Eastern part of the philosophy. And so what I'm going to do today for you as I go through this is I'm going to teach you some stuff. We're going to do some actionable stuff as we go just to help solidify. I'm going to get a little bit medical here and there because what I have found is that when I tell people kind of the science behind things and the why, oftentimes that motivates them to create change because we understand the importance of things. So I'll get a little sciencey, but then I'm going to bring it back and make this as integrative as possible. So before I get started, what I would love to know is how many of you are familiar, and I assume most of you, but I want to make sure we're on the same page as I set the container for today. So my question is, how many of you are really familiar with the concept of energy? So if you can let me know in the chat if anybody is not. So I'm going to give you guys like a brief overview. I'm seeing some yes, I'm seeing some hearts. Okay, good. Wonderful. Thank you for that. So just in case anybody is behind, I'll give you a 30-second way of catching up. So one of the ways that I first felt energy when I was experimenting and when I was starting in my doctorate, which was a Taoist-based school, was putting my hands together. So you put your hands together kind of like this, like I am in the screen, and you start to move them in and out like this. What you're going to start to feel and feel into the space here, and what you're going to start to feel is a sense of pressure, maybe of tingling, maybe of warmth, that sort of thing. So I invite everybody that is not experienced this to do this. It's fine if your camera is off. And as you do that, one of the things I want you to also know is if you don't feel that, it doesn't mean it's not working. It doesn't mean anything is broken. So as I go through some of this today, another component of this is understanding the energy of what's happening inside the body. So as I talk and we teach about safety, about trust, about communication, I'm going to talk around kind of the science behind it, like I said, but I'm also going to be talking about the physical side of the energy body, or say the energetic side of the body and what's happening there. So when we're feeling this energy, there is a something to know is we have all of these energy lines running throughout our body. And what's so cool I find about where like science and technology have gotten is that we are now at a point with science and technology where we can actually test for these energetic frequency lines in our body based upon an electrical conduction of our skin. So to move into this, one of the big energetic lines we have in our body is actually connecting in the center of our body, our heart, to our genitals. And as we begin to go through changes in trust and safety and all of these things, one thing that can get blocked is this channel between our genitals and our heart. And the way I describe it is think of it like when we're thinking about this energy, think of it like a hose, like a garden hose full of water. And if you're going to want to stop the flow of water, you're going to put a kink in that hose. And what you're going to find is that some of that energy, some of that water gets real stuck on one side, and then it's completely empty on the other. And that is what can happen between this heart and genital connection when we have lost trust, when we're feeling safe, when we're feeling vulnerable and not in a good way. And what we're doing with some of these practices is we're actually working to restore, we're working to kind of unkink that hose so that we can have more energy flow through here and so that we can live a more pleasure-filled life. So as I go through this, like one of the things too to share that's super interesting is that in Taoism, in Taoist Tantra, one of the biggest things that they teach is that pleasure is here for healing. And it's really interesting if we go back to some of the ancient Chinese texts before there was things like pharmaceutical medicine. One of the things we find that they have certain sex positions that are even used to heal certain diseases. So, for example, like missionary, which gets a ton of I feel like underplayment for being like super vanilla, is actually known as the position to heal 1,000 diseases in ancient Chinese culture. So some of what we're doing with utilizing sex and intimacy in this space is also healing disease, right? So there's positions for chronic fatigue, there's positions for PMS, there's positions for muscle cramps, like all of this stuff exists in these ancient Chinese cultures. So one of the problems that comes up when we are talking about healing and when we're talking about sex and desire and trust and all this stuff, one of the problems that comes up is this dichotomy from the body and the person, the individual, needing comfort and safety and home, and then desire, which often is stimulated by adventure and the unknown. So we have this like pendulum. And this is what happens in monogamy. And sometimes I know there's a lot of reasons why people will decide to do things like open up the relationship. But sometimes one thing is because this innate human desire to have the safety, the comfort, the norm, and all the adventure and the newness. So a lot of my work in my area of expertise is really in helping monogamous couples figure out like, how do we have these things that are seemingly opposite? Because the body that creates different chemicals and has different needs for that safety than it does for that adventure, right? So that's part of what we're exploring today as well. Okay, so we're gonna have this kind of broken out into 3 parts. So part 1 here, we are talking about the energetics. And please, if you have any questions throughout this, please put all your questions and comments in. I'll make sure that we can talk about those at the end. But one of the things that's super interesting around energetics when it comes to safety is that the body's like a smoke detector when it comes to safety. And so what our smoke detectors are doing, right, is they're sensing, is there smoke, is there smoke, is there smoke, is there smoke? They're always kind of on. And so our body is this way too, and we're constantly scanning for threats on some level. Now, there's a level where it becomes unhealthy, and this can be that hypervigilance where we're really on. But what is happening is we're constantly scanning for threats on even a subconscious level. We have a separation of the mind and the body. Because as the mind, if I'm like, okay, is my environment safe? Am I safe to have this conversation with my partner? Are we safe to try this new thing? I'm feeling, hurt or emotional about whatever maybe I have a right to, but I'm still feeling scared. All of that is in the mind, and it separates us from the body. So when we are in this hypervigilant or this survival type of state, it is almost impossible to experience pleasure, intimacy, love, connection because of that separation. And so these little threats, when I'm talking about threats, I'm talking about little threats that come up in the relationship, right? A lot of what I do in my work is working with couples that are in love. They want to be together. They are like committed to their relationship, but they feel a sense of like disconnect. And so what the types of things that are going to send our nervous system into more of this kind of vigilant state oftentimes are small little things, like, for example, a tone of voice, right? Oh, wow, they said this in that weird way because they were tired. And all of a sudden our body goes on to threat and our mind starts scanning on some level. Are we safe? And so one thing that happens from a physical perspective, so talking about the physical, is our body moves either into a fight or flight or what's called a freeze type of scenario, and we shut everything down. And we actually, on some level, start to hyperventilate, even if it's subtly. And it's so crazy, you guys, since I do a lot of lab work, I can tell if people are doing this on their labs. It literally changes the physiology of the blood when people are in this hypervigilant state. So if we're finding ourselves like subtly, like there's these subtle trusts that get broken, these subtle levels of safety, I can actually see that in people's blood work a lot. Like that's the level of like science behind this. It's really wild. And then what is happening from our energetic system is as we have all these chemical cocktails of cortisol and adrenaline going through our body, well, that's when things like that central channel shuts down. That's when we're not getting that chi, that energy to go from our heart to our genitals. And that's when oftentimes people are experiencing from a libido and sexual perspective, all of a sudden for a woman, much of the time, it's a sense of, wow, I'm like really like not feeling a lot of sensation there. Or I'm really cut off from that area. For a man, it's like, wow, my erections aren't as hard as they used to be. And maybe there's not as much performance as there used to be, which any of this stuff is common and so common that I think it's so essential that, we're doing these types of things that Dr. Willow and Leah are putting on today for us, because we got to normalize these things because it's so common, just people are not talking about it. So how does trust really erode? So the example I'm going to give you is the marble jar example. So when we are thinking about trust, when we're thinking about things that are positive, we have to imagine that they're a marble. Every time something is good that happens in our relationship, we put a marble in our jar. And when things are really good and we have a lot of trust and we feel real safe in our relationship, it's basically like a jar full of marbles. And so every time that trust erodes, we take a marble out of our jar. So for example, one of the things that, like as an example, so you understand this on a simplistic level, is like a lot of these types of things I'm talking about are like, I would say little s, trust problems or little s safety problems, meaning it's as simple as, wow, I asked partner A, asked partner B to change a light bulb. Partner B said, yes, I'm going to do it. I'm going to change that light bulb. I'm going to do it tonight. I know that's important to you. I got it. Partner A is like a couple days later, like, wow, that light bulb's not changed. It's really bothering me. I can't see in this area. Ask partner B again. I got it. Light bulb, I'm on it. It happens a couple more times. And finally, what winds up happening is partner A changes the light bulb themselves. And what this little types of things do, it seems like so small, but every time a little thing happens like that, there's a level of marble coming out of the jar. One marble comes out of the jar, not a big deal, but this is how all the little trust erodes. And how we put marbles back in the jar oftentimes are adding or thinking of like noticing is what I want to say here, by noticing things. So many times what can happen to people is we go through our day and we're doing so many things to help and support each other. And we take a marble out because of that trust being eroded. And we don't take the time to actually do these small little things that put the marble back in the jar. So small little things like, wow, honey, thank you so much for doing the dishes tonight. That really took the load off. Thank you so much for showing up on time for dinner. You know how much that means to me. Thank you for taking the kids, whatever those little things are. And so if we don't take time to notice those things, then they don't go back in the jar. And then when we have these little things, then the marbles go out of the jar. And this is how we actually wind up in these states. And basically, as that jar goes low, if that jar goes down, that is where we get to oftentimes that hypervigilance. If we have a full jar and we're noticing, then what we tend to have the capacity to do is in any acute thing, we can say something like, oh yeah, light bulb, okay, not ideal, I asked, but we can pull on our entire jar of marbles to say, oh, but they showed up here, they showed up here, they showed up here, they showed up here, they showed up here. Okay, my jar is full. Clearly, I can remind my nervous system of all the trust. So when what our body has what's called a reticuloactivating system. And this part of our body is what this part of our brain and our nervous system is doing is constantly scanning for proof that it's right. So if we have these little tiny infractions on the relationship, like I'm talking about with the light bulb example, then what our brain is designed to do if we let it is say, oh gosh, they let me down there. I really they promised something, they let me down. I feel violated. I feel like I can't trust them. And the moment we say that, then our brain goes into our memory bank and it starts to pull out other memories. Oh, right. They did this trust thing there. They did this trust thing there. Oh, right. Can't trust them. So if we can when we get to those moments where wow, this is really frustrating, what's happening here, then we can instead ask a different question and say okay, this doesn't feel great, and maybe I feel like there was trust broken, but what ways, so here's the difference of the question. What ways have they actually shown me that I can trust them? So when we ask that from our positive, then the reticuloactivating system kicks on in the neurological system and it starts to scan our past for all these different ways around oh, okay, I can trust them here. 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 And the more we on a day-to-day basis keep that marble jar full, the more we can easily, when these acute things up, the more we can easily draw on that jar to say, oh, right, there's all these memories. You guys with me? So one of the things from an action step for beyond today, I really invite you guys, you're seeing so many fun emojis here that I've never seen before. This is great. That I really invite you guys to do is to schedule 5 minutes or plan 5 minutes every day if you can, for a check-in with your partner. And this check-in is to actually take a moment and say, let me think about today some of the things that you did that were valuable to me. Let me think about some of the things that led me to trust you more, led me to feel more safe. Because again, the marbles go back in the jar when we notice, right? That's how we get the marbles back in. So, and I know sometimes it can be difficult to find 5 minutes. I get it. I do so much coaching for all my clients on habit and habit changing. And so one of the exercises I often tell people to do is to make a priority list of the top priorities in your life. And hopefully your partner is right there at the top. Your partner, yourself, your kids, your spiritual life, all of those should be right there at the top. And so if your partner's right there at the top, where hopefully they are, then your next question is, how much time do you give them in your day? And obviously we have a lot going on. It's not like we can give everybody a ton of time every day, but what we're looking for is that mental note of, oh, this person is so high priority and I have space in my day for them, even if it's just this 5-minute check-in some days. And so that's what we're really trying to get the mind to orient around, oh, right, I create time for the things I prioritize. And really it's that 5 minutes to say, okay, what do we value? What was amazing today? How can we put marbles back in our jar? And then it's also a quick check-in to say, hey, is there anything that, that happened today that you're holding on to that we can just clear the air about? And so we're looking to, it's almost like all these little relationship things. I love the analogy. My friend and several of our friends that are on here, Sierra and Rano, who do a great relationship coaching program called Eden World, they gave me a great analogy of a boat that I love around imagine that every little thing that happens when we're talking about safety, trust, it's just a little nick in our boat. None of these things are going to sink your boat, but if you get enough little nicks, that's when your boat sinks. So this 5-minute check-in is really about saying hey, we have a little nick in our boat. Let's keep it a little nick. Let's put a little patch on that so that we don't essentially sink our love boat. Okay, so for a exercise that goes with this. So that is kind of the physical thing about how we can do what we can do to keep this strong. Now, what about the energetic center? What about that central channel that oftentimes has got dysregulated, connecting the heart to the genitals? So I'm going to invite everybody to close your eyes for a second. If you have a partner, there's a way we can do this as a partner exercise. If not, I'm going to teach you how to do this so that later when you're with a partner, you can do this. And what we're going to do is just close our eyes for a second, put our hands on our heart, and just first start by taking a deep breath. And on your next exhale, imagining that the energy, your breath, is going down the center of your body all the way to the place about 2 inches below your navel. And then bring that energy from your navel back up to your heart. So it's going to look like inhaling as the energy goes from your belly to heart, exhaling as it goes from heart to belly. And as you do this, feel for any place where the energy feels like it might be stuck. And see if you can breathe into those areas. And see if you can make this tube, this light, this energy, see if you can make the tube bigger, wider, fuller, stronger. And if you don't feel anything, remember, you can just imagine this. It doesn't have to be felt to be effective. Now, the next time you get back to your heart, I want you to imagine that your partner is sitting right across from you and sending energy from your heart to their heart. And so whether they're there or not, you can just practice like they are. So just practicing a couple times, bringing it from belly to heart to their hearts. And then on the next breath in and out, returning that feeling to the belly. And then opening your eyes. So this is one way that we can clear this channel and reset that from the belly to the heart, from the genitals to the heart. When we are doing this in actual practice, we will want to extend this. But this is a lovely practice too that you can add in even before your 5-minute check-in to get that heart coherence. I know Leah is teaching you guys eye gazing, so I didn't want to include that today because we have a lot of other stuff to cover. But what she's teaching you around eye gazing would pair really, really nicely with this. So different ways we are connecting energetically and getting our frequency to line up in order before we have these types of things. And that is one easy way to really keep the central channel open. Okay, so let me check my list for our next phase here. Okay, so now we're talking about the chemistry of repair. right? So if we've had these types of small little violations, these small things that are the nicks in the vote, one of the chemistry ways we repair is through orgasm. And what's really, what I talk so much about in medicine are these vicious cycles we get into. Because what's so tricky is that the chemical of orgasms, and I'm going to teach you some of the science that is just fascinating on this, helps to repair trust. But then if we're not feeling trust or safe or, able to be vulnerable, then we're not having we're not having orgasms typically. We're not engaging. So how do we get out of this vicious cycle? So what is also interesting is that we really, from what I, study and believe and practice, I really don't think we can repair trust. We can't think our way back into trust. We can't repair it only with our minds. It's a feeling. We feel our way back into trust. And I say that because think about this. Like if something happens and, and there's like a breach of safety or trust, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh, I trust them. I just trust them. I just trust them. And I'm just saying this over and over and over in my mind, but I don't feel it in my body. How is that ever going to be repaired? So that there's that dissonance where it's like, yes, we can use our mind, but ultimately we need to feel those changes in our body in order to experience like that closeness again. So when we are in these hypervigilant states, some of the things that are chemically happening to the body, one big thing that is chemically happening is there are changes in our amygdala, our fear center, right? So when we're in this fight or flight, our amygdala is like going wild. And what we see with orgasm is that orgasm will actually calm the amygdala. I'm sure you guys know about cortisol because cortisol is getting like such a reputation online for the belly fat hormone. Cortisol is also another one. So cortisol is, and I'll answer your question there in a little while, Virio, but cortisol is also lowered with oxytocin. In addition to that, there is something called trust adaptation that is studied in the trust science. And trust adaptation is all about our biological ability to forgive small grievances. So the bigger trust adaptation we have, the easier it is for us to say, oh, okay, well, that maybe hurt a little bit, but that wasn't that big of a deal, and I'm going to forgive you easily. Sounds really important in context of a relationship, right? Well, oxytocin, our orgasm hormone, has been shown to increase that trust adaptation. And I believe this is one of the reasons why when we see surveys on couples that play together, stay together, like couples that are intimate, that are sexually intimate at least once a week, are the ones that are reporting the happiest relationships. And I think there's a lot of reason for that. But I think a huge part of this is that trust adaptation. Dr. Willow and Leah, I was thinking I had a whole hour today. Do I have 30 minutes? Do I have it wrong? 30 minutes. Okay, thank you. I'm seeing Deborah come on. So I'm like, I might need to wrap this up. Okay, well, that is good to know. So when we are like having orgasm, and one of the huge things that I work with people and work with couples with is how to actually bring novelty back. But I'll tell you in wrapping this up, I think the most important thing in wrapping this up is erotic repair. And so if you're finding that, wow, you haven't been as intimate, or if there's things where it's like maybe there's been some erectile dysfunction, or maybe there's been a lack of like pleasure in the orgasms, or maybe vaginal numbness has happened. If there's anything where it's like, gosh, like, we're not having sex as much as we want. Like we understand this vicious cycle. We understand the value, but how do we get back to it? I really love taking people through about a 6-week erotic repair practice. And in erotic repair, what we are doing is we are doing the first couple weeks where we trade sensual touch. And we're doing these exercises like I'm describing here, like the breath work and all of that to get back into the body. And when we do that, we take the orgasm off the table. We take all of that. And what we're doing afterwards is we're talking to the other person about what we loved, about what we want more of, And when we do that, what we're doing is we're adding things to our marble jar that are like, oh, talking about touch is safe. Talking about touch makes me feel better. All of those types of things. So that is an amazing way that we can start to build our sex love bucket back up. And I have so much more to say. Let me answer a couple of these questions. And then I would just encourage you guys to get my checklist. You can go online and check out a bunch of work. And I have a ton more that I can help you guys with right now. Blood work, the blood work answer is where we see that is in our CO2 levels. So when we test our blood and we test carbon dioxide, which we see is when people start more in that hypervigilance, our carbon dioxide actually goes down in our blood because we're taking short breaths. So it's like this. I'm going to exaggerate it and not scream into the microphone, but it's like this, right? So that's like exaggerated. And so when we exaggerate that, every time I breathe out, that's that carbon dioxide. And so we see that I'm excreting more carbon dioxide out, so it's going to go down in the blood. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, those kind of things, the tests for that are not very reliable. You really need a cerebral spinal tap test for that. So I would really not recommend doing a spinal tap in order to measure those. And I think that's what I'll wrap up with. So in conclusion, I would really encourage you guys as action steps, your 5 minutes, scheduling that, doing the breath work before you connect, and then working on your erotic repair practice. And I hope you guys will reach out, get my free yes/no checklist, yes/no maybe checklist that talks about novelty. I'm doing a lot for Valentine's Day this week as well on my side, and have discounts and fun things going on my side as well. So please reach out if I can support you in any way. And it's so great. Thank you so much, Leah and Dr. Willow, for having me. It's a pleasure.